Hi, I'm Martin and this is Make Your Own Sound, the channel in which we are talking about how to create your own sound mixing console, episode 11. And in this video we'll talk about audio plugins and what to do with them in our live mixing software. But we also did that in the previous video. That's because the script about the plugins became quite large, so I decided to split it into two videos. This is part 2, and if you didn't watch part 1, it's over there, so please go watch it first and then come back, because this episode catches on exactly where the previous one ended. Okay, in the previous episode we learned how to install plugins and how to use them. Basic and straightforward stuff. Now we'll dive into a more unsure and somehow a bit philosophical realm. A realm of compromises. As I mentioned earlier in the series, when we are building our own digital audio mixing console, the phrase "it just works" simply doesn't apply. It's our job to make it work by testing and troubleshooting until everything is great. When you buy a console, you get something with 5 or 10 or maybe 20 integrated processors, and someone else in the company which makes the console has the job to make sure things work well and stable with one another. And sometimes they are good sounding processors, but sometimes they're really nothing special. Nevertheless, the company will ask you to pay big money for the job they did, and in return will give you not so many options. On the other hand, what we are doing gives us a tremendous variety and flexibility. There are literally hundreds of plugins, both free and paid, that you can try and potentially use. And they're not only the standard type like EQs and compressors and gates, there are some really weird and different and smart plugins for more special occasions, and the best thing is, more are coming every year. But not everything is sunshine and roses. And as they say in the Spider-Man comics, with great power, you know where I'm going with this. Not every plugin in existence will work or will work well with our console. And here the responsibility falls on you and me to find out which one is which. I'll try to give you some knowledge, some experience and a kind of a formula for testing things, but the real work you'll have to do yourself. Here's what you need to know. First, SAC is notoriously focused at real-time audio. After all, it's a live sound mixing software, and as such, apart from the latency you'll get from the sound card drivers, it doesn't want you to add even a millisecond more to the processing time. That's why it doesn't have a delay compensation capabilities, and it has no desire to work with plugins which have even the slightest latency. Just for now, I'll presume most of you know what a plugin delay is and how the delay compensation systems work. For those who don't, I'll probably make a more detailed video in the future, but now I'll try to explain some things quick and simple. Simply put, some plugins process the audio which goes through them instantaneously, and others need more time. So, when an audio stream goes through a slower plugin, it gets delayed a little bit. Or a little bit more, depending on the plugin. This is called a plugin delay or latency, and there is a standard protocol for it. Every plugin actually knows how much time it needs to process audio, and the moment it is inserted, it reports its delay to the host software, measured in audio samples. So, for example, if you work at a sample rate of 48 kHz and a plugin needs 48 samples to process audio, this will delay the sound by 1 millisecond. Here are 3 plugins and all of them come from the same manufacturer. But this one has 0 samples of delay. This one has 1 sample of delay, which equals to 0.02 milliseconds of audio latency, and this one has 64 samples of delay, which equals to 1.3 milliseconds of audio latency. How I know that? Well, I load a plugin on a channel, then I click on the blue pyramid, and here is the reported delay in samples. Now, how all of this translates to the real world. On one hand, there are the monitors for the performers on the stage. No matter if you use stage speakers or headphones, it's always a good idea to keep the latency here to a minimum. It's very disturbing if you try to sing and hear your voice in the monitors a little bit late. I'm over-exaggerating here, but you've got the point. And it's even worse for those who play percussive instruments. So try to use plugins with no delay for the monitors. Or if you must use something else, stick to those with minimum latency, like this one that I showed you earlier. And always try it beforehand with your musicians. Check if they notice it, and if they do, can they live with this delay and does it affect their performance. Okay, on the other hand, there are the front of house speakers. These are the speakers the audience listens to, and here actually you can allow yourself a little bit more delay. Because people cannot very clearly distinguish the small amount of difference between what they see and what they hear, and even if they do, they won't really care, unless it's something outrageous, like a quarter of a second, for example. Nevertheless, check your plugins in advance, and again, try to stick to those with less latency. And have in mind, you can run across another issue, and this is a big one. Some of your audio channels will have no additional delay, and others will because of the particular plugins you've put on them. According to the way you use them, this may cause slight or sometimes severe phasing issues that can seriously damage your sound. So, if you have to use plugins which have a delay, use them wisely. And if you're not experienced enough to know when to use what, it's always a good idea to stick to the plugins that have no additional latency. Which should be very easy, considering that by default, SAC won't even let you use plugins which delay the sound. Now, we'll go back to the software and see how it works. I've spent some time talking about plugins which have a delay, but if you try to insert that kind of a plugin into SAC, it will simply not work. Let me show you. I will use these two plugins. This is an SSL channel strip emulation by Duende, and this is an SSL channel strip emulation by Waves. They may look a little bit differently, but ultimately try to accomplish the same thing. But one of them works with SAC right away, and the other one doesn't. I'll use the drum loop from the previous episode, and I'll insert the plugins on the drum group. First, the SSL channel from Duende. Now I'll play the drums and I'll bring up the high frequencies on the EQ. And as you can hear and see, the plugin works with its meters and everything. Now let's try the same with the SSL channel from Waves. As you can see, nothing happens. The sound doesn't change and the meter on the plugin is standing still. And here's why. As I explained earlier, every plugin reports its own latency to the host software. So, at the moment you click Add, SAC listens to what the plugin has to say. If the plugin reports zero latency, SAC turns it on. But if the plugin reports even one sample of delay, SAC turns the plugin off and refuses to use it. You can still see the plugin's interface, but it is dead inside. So, if that's the case, why did I spend so much time talking about using plugins which have a delay in SAC? Well, if you so much wish to use these kinds of plugins, there is a way to trick the software to allow you to use them. And the trick is to use some kind of a chainer. I've had success with this one. This is the Explotop chainer, and I'll leave a link for it in the description. This is simply a plugin in which you can load other plugins in a chain. So, how does the trick work? It's actually very simple. When you insert the chainer plugin for the first time, it's initially empty, so the plugin reports zero latency and SAC allows it to work. From now on, you can load whatever plugin you like into the chainer and it will work also. So, let's try the SSL channel from Waves once again. I will load the chainer first, then I'll click here, go to Effects and choose SSL channel stereo. Remember, if you use this chainer plugin, never try to load something on the first row. This is only the input of the plugin, so always start with the second row. Okay, to reveal the plugin, I'll click on this button, and here it is. Now, let's try the drums once again. And And as you can see and hear, this time everything works. Now, with all that already cleared, let's talk a bit about the situation with the plugins as a whole and the things you have to pay attention to. As I mentioned before, it's our responsibility to make things work with our sound mixing console. So, here are some facts about the plugins I'll share with you from my experience, so that you don't get frustrated when you start building your own plugin library for your console. I'll give you 3 things. 1. Not every plugin in the world works with SAC, even if it has no latency. I don't know exactly why, but it's true. So, check in advance, and if that's the case, try to find a replacement from another manufacturer that works. 2. Some plugins are so much more lightweight than others. There are some good plugins that are so light you can use dozens of them and your computer will barely notice. And then there are plugins so heavy that just 5 or 6 of them will drain your CPU dry. So that's something to consider in the never-ending battle for resources. And 3. Not all plugins that work with SAC are equal in their behavior. Some plugins will seemingly work, but not very well. So, what symptoms can you expect? I'll rate them here from the least troublesome to the worst. Type 1. The plugin works well overall, but in some situations gives you occasional sound artifacts, clicks or pops. I'll give you an example with this plugin. It works okay while it's closed or while it's open and you're tweaking it. But when you first insert it on a project, it makes a click. And every time you reveal the plugin, it makes a click again. Type 2. The plugin causes CPU spikes. Some plugins are not steady in their load on the system. If you use them, your CPU usage appears stable for some minutes and then it can rise quickly by 10 or 20%. Then goes back to normal and the cycle repeats. It's not so bad if you have enough system resources to spare, but if you are somewhere close to 50% of CPU usage, stay away from such plugins. Type 3. The plugin makes pops and clicks even if its interface is closed and the plugin works on the background. This kind of behavior obviously makes the plugin useless. And type 4. The plugin is unstable and crashes the whole software. Well, if that's the case, I have nothing more to say. Okay, how to test your plugins? What I do is create a somewhat large project. Not too big, but certainly not too small. This is my project. It has 23 mono and 5 stereo inputs, 5 groups and 3 auxes. This is actually a multi-track of a song I like a lot and downloaded a while ago. So I brought the channels into SAC like in a virtual soundcheck so that I have an actual song to work on. Then I mixed the song using just what I have on the wide mixers and some native plugins, because this is the most lightweight and stable way to do things here. Now I have a fully mixed song which uses very little CPU and am able to use this as a base to test my plugins. Of course, you don't have to do all that. You can just enable a bunch of channels, let's say 30, and give them the same input from your sound card. For example, input 1. Then you can plug your microphone and sing while testing, but if you find it tiresome, maybe it's better to just put some music through the channels. And don't forget to set a master channel. Now is the time to check if your system is absolutely stable without any plugins. Play the music through all the channels for at least 20 minutes and listen for any kind of unwanted artifacts in the sound. If you start to hear some occasional pops or clicks, there is something wrong with your system and you'll have to troubleshoot it first. If you're not sure or decide you cannot trust your ears completely, you can always click on the load meter. For about 2 seconds, a dialog will appear and you'll see if your system has some slipped buffers. Pay attention to what you see on the second row. If your system is absolutely stable, you'll have no slipped buffers and this number will stay 0. You can click here every minute or so during the testing to see what's going on. If after 30 minutes you don't have any slipped buffers and you don't hear any imperfections in the sound, you can proceed to testing your plugins. Now choose the plugin you want to test and start to insert the hell out of it on all active channels. 5 on channel 1, then 5 on channel 2, and so on. Don't worry, you cannot overdo it. SAC can only take 125 plugin instances per project. As you continue adding plugins, pay attention to the load meter over here. The more plugins you add, the more load you'll introduce to your system. Continue to add plugins until you reach a little below 50%. After that, it's dangerous. Depending on how powerful your system is, if the plugin you're testing is a lightweight one, you may never reach 50%. But if it's a heavy one, you may reach 50 quite quickly. And this will be your first benchmark. Now you know if the plugin is light or heavy or somewhere in between. Next, it's time to see how the plugin behaves. Close all the instances and let the plugins work on the background. Leave the music playing through all the channels with all the plugins inserted on them for at least 20 minutes and listen for any kind of unwanted artifacts in the sound. If there's gonna be any, they will appear quite quickly. And it's always a good idea to check for slipped buffers. If you start to hear some occasional pops or clicks even if the plugin is closed, or if there are more than 1 or 2 slipped buffers, this is not a plugin you can rely on. Or if the plugin crashes the software, this is obviously not the plugin you can rely on. Just to be sure, repeat the test and give the plugin one more chance. If it crashes the software again, you can surely blacklist this plugin. Okay, what do we do if the plugin behaves well while closed? Then we can go on to the next stage of testing. Some plugins are okay while closed, but when their interface is on the screen, it causes problems. So reveal 1 or 2 or even 3 instances of the plugin and let them stay on screen while the music is playing through the channels. Continue to listen for unwanted audio artifacts and check for slipped buffers. If this goes well, proceed to the next stage, which is mess with the plugins as much as you can. Go to channel 1, open a plugin, and mess randomly with its dials. Close it, go to another channel, open another plugin, and do the same. Close it again. Next, open 2 or 3 instances of the plugin and mess with all of them. Do this for at least 20 or 30 minutes. While doing it, listen for problems with the sound and check for slipped buffers. If after all this the plugin behaves well and the sound is fine, you can add this plugin to your library. And if you discover some problems along the way, you can draw your conclusions and decide if the plugin is worth using in some situations. After all, this will be your own sound mixing console and the final decisions are also yours, along with the consequences. Finally, I have something for you. I did my own testing of 85 plugins and I made a chart for you to use. They are all plugins with no delay, which work with SAC right away, but as you can see in the chart, not all of them work the same. There are 3 categories divided by colors: green, yellow and red. The greens work well and I highly recommend for you to try them. The yellows have some issues which you can read about here, but can be usable in some situations if you're careful. And you better stay away from the reds. It took me 2 weeks just to do these tests, so I hope they will be helpful and I'll leave a link for the document in the description. In the future I'll test more plugins and the document will grow bigger. But please don't blindly take my word for the plugins I've tested. Use it as a guideline, but do your own tests on your own system because your results may vary. Well, in this episode and in the previous one, we learned how to install plugins, how to use them and how to test their behavior. So, I guess this is it for this episode. And in the next one, we'll take a look at the other really great thing about this software, the monitor mixers. So, see you there, and thank you for watching. Oh, you're still here! Great! There are a few more important things I need to mention, like The video you just watched is part of a series and all the episodes are connected. So, if you stumbled on this episode by accident and you wasn't sure what exactly I was talking about, you can go and watch the previous episodes, or at least the first episode over there, which explains the idea of the whole endeavor. And I'll be very happy if you liked the video. It's part of one big tutorial about how to build your own sound mixing console. So if you did, please consider clicking on the like button. And if you find this topic interesting or useful, you may subscribe and click on the bell so you'll be notified when I'm ready with the next video. And I know there are people out there who do what I do and know more than me. So, if you know something that I don't, or have ideas for new episodes, please tell me. I'll be happy to also learn from you.